Welcome to Pineland Underground, the official podcast of the U.S. Army John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School.
Here we explore critical themes across the realm of Army Special Operations. This is Pineland Underground. All right, we are recording again from the Falcon Snail Pub in Southern Pines, North Carolina, while the U.S. Open is going on right next to us. Right now we have the most guests we've ever had on the podcast. We never attempted to try to record this many people, so this could go two ways. Either we knock this out of the park, or it burns and we all get fired from it.
Chuck, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 RSOF members down here in the Falcon Snail Pub. I'm glad we were able to book the pub.
The owner's pretty, he seems like a cool dude. He was nice enough to let us use this thing again. All right. Seems like a pretty awesome guy.
I'm going to predict right now this will be the most listened to Pineland Underground podcast to date.
We know the rule there, sir. If it surpasses the one that I did initially, we take it off because I don't want to trump so.
As long as we surpass the General Tovo one.
That's the benchmark. As long as we're above that one, we're good. You know what I mean?
The one you and Chris did is
number 2.
It's about to be number 1.
That's what I thought.
It will be.
It will be number 1 after this. Well, it will be number 2 after this one, is my prediction.
I hope eventually you have enough podcasts that you don't know which one's number 1 or number 2.
This is my third.
And they all complement each other.
All right, so with that,
Touche.
Colonel Farris, who happens to be the Chief of Staff of the Special Warfare Center and School, who's been on this podcast numerous times. Can you please give an introduction to the awesome people we have in the room?
Most certainly. So where to start is the question. I'll start to my right. Command Sergeant Major Sean Mullins. So quickly, Sean and I went to the Q course together. In fact, we were in the same SEER course. And for those who are familiar with SEER school, Sean was the youngest person going through our SEER course. So he was known as the war baby. And people know what that means too. As far as the punishment goes, there's 2 people. There's the senior responsible officer, essentially the senior most ranking person. And then there's the youngest person. And between the 2 of them, they get a lot of extra love and attention. And I can remember Sean to this day, and he's still got the exact same hair, which is impressive. But come full circle, he went to 7th group, 5th group. He spent some time in a special mission unit. And most importantly, I would say, I had the pleasure of working with Sean as the Command Sergeant Major of 1st Special Warfare Training Group last year. And there's guys that you would work for any day, even as NCOs, and Sean is one of those guys that I would work for any day of the week. One of certainly the smartest, most intelligent, most capable. And we're here to talk about leadership today and just an incredible Green Beret leader. So that's Sean. I'm going to work my way over to Sergeant Major retired Kyle Lamb, who probably to most of the listeners needs no introduction. All right. Where to begin? A veteran, let's say. Heck, you came in before the Gulf War even, I believe.
Yeah, of course I did.
Of course you did.
Yeah. 1832, I think I first started.
You still got good hair too.
Yeah,
though. You know what I mean? I need a hat.
No, I came in 86.
86.
Yeah, so I was in 5th group for Desert Shield, Desert Storm.
Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Then he went to Special Mission Unit Selection. So then a veteran of October 3rd, right? Mogadishu, Black Hawk Down.
Operation Gothic Serpent.
Bosnia, Kosovo, and all that's before 9/11, right? And so then we get to after 9/11. So I think at least 1 rotation to Afghanistan, and then numerous rotations to Iraq after that.
No, never Afghanistan. No? Just 5 tours to Iraq.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm sorry, Kyle. I thought you did 1 to Afghanistan.
I wanted to go to Afghanistan. They wouldn't let me. So
fake news.
Yeah.
But
that
again,
was the other lamb.
Someone who needs no introduction otherwise, and we all are familiar with VikingTactics, has written several books. In fact, we'll talk about probably at least one of them today. So, Kyle, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Last but certainly not least, we have Colonel Retired Tim Ladouceur. And this is a big day, I think, because 1, this is Tim's first podcast.
It's a case of beer.
and when he got invited, I didn't actually believe that he would take us up on it.
I didn't
Tim,
either.
You know what I mean? And he actually came back and was like, yeah, I'll do it. And I couldn't believe it pretty quickly. But for a couple of things. So some of you out there, and if you haven't, you need to, and we can probably put the tags in later. Kyle recently did on his VikingTactics podcast a great podcast with another friend of ours, Command Sergeant Major retired Jesse Betcher, who lives up in Wisconsin now. And towards the end, they're having a conversation, reminiscing about some old times and guys with back tattoos, etc. And the name Tim Ladouceur pops up. and you'll have to listen to the podcast to get the rest of it. But I know it's generated a lot of interest since then because I kind of follow the podcast and people replying, and everyone wants to know who's this guy.
Who's the special ops guy with a back tattoo? I mean, who is that guy?
And I say that to say this because those who know Tim and have had the pleasure of getting to know him and serve either for him or alongside him or any capacity know what an incredible leader he is. And he's one of those few guys, this reputation-wise, whoever you run into, people just say what an amazing leader Tim is. So Tim, not here to hype you up too much. We talked earlier, you need a hype man, but it's thank you for gracing us with your presence today. And I predict this is going to be your coming out party. Not that kind of coming out party, but I'm talking about on social media. So we can stand by for probably Tim to come up on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all that stuff. Get ready for it because it's going to happen. With that,
I originally thought it was going to be Colonel Ladouceur was the personal security detail for Kyle Lamb, or Chuck was going to hire him on to be the bouncer here at the Falcon Snail Pub.
Yeah, he's definitely the biggest dude in the room. Yeah,
he's ducking as we're here in the basement of the Falcon Snail Pub.
He'll probably say the least, but he'll also probably say the most impactful things, if that makes sense. And on that note, Connor's reminded me of something. Hey, the opinions expressed therein, mine especially, are not representative of the U.S. Army Special Operations Command, the United States Army, or the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School. So I'll just say that's my own caveat. All opinions expressed going forward, for me at least, are my own.
Appreciate the disclaimer.
At the beginning of every podcast.
I don't know.
We decided not to do it because we're like, it's just the risk.
Yeah,
and I'm fired along with you because you're the chief of staff anyway. Anyway, so Bobby, can you please lead us into the first discussion point?
Yeah, appreciate the introduction. So again, 6 of us out here, but as we kick off Pineland Underground episodes with our keynote guest, Sergeant Major retired Kyle Lamb, just kind of want to send it over to you for some opening comments specifically and kind of set the stage of what you're doing here. Over the next 2 days, you're spending time on base over at Fort Bragg at the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School, and really talking to a group of our students going through the course who are about to embark on their soft journey, and talking to cadre members and instructors who are, I'd say, at that midpoint or the pinnacle leadership levels, giving back to those students. So I just want to send it over to you. What is your message while you're here speaking back at SWCS? What is your message to our RSOF warriors who are starting their journey or kind of that midway through? What are you imparting on them?
Well, the goal is to impart some leadership tidbits there, whatever that might be. You're going to have a lot of NCOs there that have, and officers that have a lot of experience downrange already, but there might be something that we throw at them that they go, oh yeah, that'd be a good way to, to think about leadership. We talked a little bit before we fired up the podcast here about, what's your word? That's something that I wrote in Leadership in the Shadows. And what's the one leadership trait that's the most important to you? Well, if I can get every person there to understand what that is, and then their leaders to understand that, it's going to help them lead their people, because it's not about your word, it's about the people you're leading. If you say you want your leader to be truthful, well, then you better make sure you're very truthful to that individual as you're leading them. I also believe that one of the other things I try to get across is we need to read history. We need to study history. And that'll be something that'll become evident as I go through that. I'm hoping that your Special Forces guys are going to be more impressive than some of the folks that I speak to on a regular basis, because out in America, it's kind of sad when we start talking about history and the lack of understanding about it. I'm not saying you need to know every date. That doesn't matter. Dates really don't matter. It's the story of that piece of history. So whether I talk about something that happened with, say, General McChrystal, which is recent history, or I talk about something that happened with General Lee or Ulysses S. Grant, that's going to be important. I think that these guys understand they dealt with the same problems that we're dealing with. We all think we're plowing the ground for the first time. Read about Afghanistan. There's a book out called The Great Game. Have any of you guys read that? That's one of the best books I've ever read, and it talks about Afghanistan back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and all the mistakes that were made. And guess what? Not only did those countries that made those mistakes then go back in and do the same mistake again, we did the same mistakes that they did. And guess what? It ended up with them leaving badly and people getting their heads chopped off. And that's history. So
hubris is a son of a bitch.
Have you read Churchill's Malachian Field Force?
I have a little
Right.
bit. Now I haven't read the whole book. I've read his River War book entirely, but that other one I've just read parts of. Yeah.
But the same lessons, like that's in the late 1800s, right?
Yep.
But you're like, wow, this could be the 19 or the 2000s, right? What we did in Afghanistan, that played out exactly as that played out back when he was there.
Have you read his 4-volume series called The History of the English-Speaking Peoples? That should be mandatory reading for every American, because one of the things that we don't realize is that when the Brits say the history of the English-speaking peoples, I'm going to let the clue bird fly over and take a dump on your head. We are English-speaking peoples, and he talks about our predecessors in England and Germany and Spain. I mean, all those people we're tied to through our kings and queens back in the day. And then he gives a lesson on leadership, but also a lesson on our history of America, better than any other history book I've ever read. A concise history, and he talks about everything from the Revolutionary War to the Civil War. It's awesome. I would highly recommend anybody. I mean, anything you read from Churchill is awesome, but that is the best reading that I've ever read of something that he wrote.
Were you always I guess kind of a history nut, or that much of a voracious reader looking at history of war, of civilizations, of conflict? Or is there something that throughout your upbringing or time in the service that really sparked that for you?
I know exactly when it was.
Okay.
And I know exactly what the guy told me. There was a guy named Earl Fillmore who was killed on the 3rd of October in 1993 in Somalia. Yesterday, there was actually a ceremony to upgrade his award to a DSC. He asked me a historical question, and he was from Pennsylvania. And he asked me a historical question about the Civil War, and I couldn't answer it. And he said, "Man, you are so stupid." Okay, well, what do you say to that? You got to kind of agree or disagree. Well, he outranked me, so I was like, "Roger that, Sarn," So I'm stupid.
Sorry, I've never heard of Gettysburg.
Yeah. So I'd heard of Gettysburg, but I couldn't answer the question. So the next day he brought in a book by a guy named Nathan Bedford Forrest, Firstest with the Mostest, or whatever it was called, First with the Most. And he said, "Don't be an idiot, read this book." And I read that book, and it changed my world, because none of my school teachers had ever made history sound so amazing as that book did. And I think that's something that we should be inspired to do as officers. It's one thing, you're kind of summer help, but as NCOs,
Ouch.
yeah, I'm joking there, but as NCOs, you should inspire the guys that you're leading on a daily basis to learn history. And I mean, one of the ways we do that is read. If you want to listen to podcasts, you can do that as well. But I like to read. I like to take notes in my books, and I read that book and I went, "Man, this is amazing." So then after that, I started, what else can I read? And I had read as a kid. I'd read a lot of stuff. And when I started out in the 82nd as a paratrooper, and I remember reading some fiction books, and they were kind of fun to read, but I didn't learn anything. Whereas when I started reading history, I was inspired by that, and it's just made me read more and more. And Tim knows, when we served together, I was Troop Sergeant Major when Tim was Troop Commander in C Squadron, and I didn't read as much then as I do now, because I didn't have as much time to read, and I didn't have as much time sitting there flying or whatever. But we had a lot of good discussions too, and it always was interesting to just go around the table. Some of the people that we had in our troop, they all know something about history. Well, if you can just learn the piece of history that they know, you've already picked up more than what most Americans have. And then if you can dig in even deeper into that, remember we had guys like Con Furman. I mean, Con it was all maybe about cowboys and Indian history or whatever, but it was awesome history. Then of course, Jesse Betcher, who's crazy smart dude, Sean Stevens, some of those cats. The medics are always smart. 18 Echoes are always smart, seems like. Yeah. So, I guess that's kind of a long-winded answer there, but that's exactly when it happened.
That's perfect.
Yeah, and I think more NCOs should do that to their guys. Hey, you're stupid. Go read.
Well, Kyle, real quick, on the topic of reading and history and leadership, my personal experience have been like the best leaders that I've ever worked for were readers. They read. You know, they were cerebral guys too. They were action guys as well, right? They could.
Did they read good or did they read well?
They read well, and good.
I
But
think,
my point is, you know what I mean? Like they actually were learners. You know what I mean? Continuous learners. They were always trying to improve themselves, and a lot of times it was through reading. You know, and reading
It's
history.
real, right? With
Yep.
everything.
Yep.
Open up a book and read it.
Yep.
Whether it's doctrine or history.
If you want a new idea, read an old book.
There you go.
yeah, that idea of lifelong learning, I'm sure will come up later as we talk about leadership, but specifically as it pertains to reading history, it's really important there is you're learning from failure, right? And that's also a really critical component of leadership, which I'm sure we'll get into shortly.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a book called the Thoughts from a Philosophical Fighter Pilot. Have you ever read that?
No.
It's a Admiral Stockdale book, and he says, in the military we train to fail, and I got immediately like offended when I read that. And then he continued to talk about how in the Navy as an aviator they train to fail, and I thought, well, no wonder. And then when he explained it, I said, no, we actually do that too. And if you're not training to fail, because what is a failure on a mission? A contingency. Well, you got to train for your contingencies or you truly will fail. And what he was saying was you must have very, very, very good contingency planning. And if you remember what he did, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which never happened, by the way, our politician said it did, but it never happened. He's one of the pilots that flew on that mission, and it never, you know, what the government said and what really happened, the guy in the pointy end of the stick,
You're saying it was fake news.
it was totally fake news. And LBJ used that for us to launch Vietnam. And then what happened to Stockdale was he got rolled up and got put in the Hanoi Hilton for, I think, 5 years. And that book is a good book because guys like y'all sitting at this table, you will dig it because you've experienced all this, because you all do contingency planning. You absolutely have to, or you're going to fail. And then the other thing he talks about is Epictetus, who is a very famous Stoic. And that was kind of my first introduction to him. And that made me go in another direction and start to study, because I had read some Seneca stuff, and Seneca's kind of a douchebag. Epictetus is like the legit Stoic dude. And just to backtrack, who gave me that book to read? Larry Perino, retired full
Ranger.
bird, right?
Yeah, I think
Lieutenant
so.
Colonel or Colonel.
Probably Colonel.
Yeah, Colonel. That we were in Somalia together, and I was talking to him one day. He goes, "Have you ever read this about the Stoicism?" And I'm going to send you this book. And I got it, and I thought, Stockdale, it's amazing, you know. So if we, as leaders in special operations, you know, don't just think you got to read SEAL books to learn something. You know, you need to read about other parts of leadership that we can definitely dig into. So.
Well, so the Army defines leadership as the activity of influencing people by providing purpose, direction, and motivation to accomplish the mission and improve the organization. And I wanted to, you know, it's something that Chuck kind of repeatedly hits on, because that last point is always sometimes forgotten, is improve the organization. But I'd love to kind of tap in a little bit, you know, really open up to the group. You know, our theme today is leadership, but I'd like to get into some vignettes or some experiences you each had at different portions in your career that brought you into the leadership approaches that you currently have today. And Colonel Ladouceur, I'd love to kind of kick it over to you, sir. Could you talk to us a little bit about your leadership experiences and how at the end of your career you reflect on your leadership and you know, really just try to impart those and mentor others based off your own personal experiences?
Yeah, sure. The first thing I tell people about transitioning from the military into the civilian world is, you know, the first question you get is, hey, what do you like to do? And I always go back to, hey, the best time in the military is being able to teach, coach, and mentor. And it kind of circles back with what, you know, this austere group has already said is, so if leadership is influence, how do you gain that influence? And when I think about the best leaders that I've ever had, their ability to influence me was through how much I could tell they cared, right? And it's not this warm and fuzzy kind of side of caring. It's this sense of, hey, I am here in large part to ensure your well-being in light of whatever mission we may have to accomplish together. And so the best leaders, to me, influence through teaching, through taking the time to encourage, to push. Sometimes it's a boot in the ass, right?
Oh, yes.
Sometimes that's the lesson you will never, ever forget. But if you reflect and you go, oh my gosh, that changed me for the better in some way, then it might have been worth it, right? So it's not always being coddled. It's not always being encouraged. Sometimes it's facing the hard truths. And some of the hardest truths that I've had to learn, and I've had to learn a lot, came at the hands of a leader that at the time I may not have understood what they were doing, but they really had my best interests at heart.
No, I absolutely love that. Any examples from kind of the group of somebody that imparted that?
I got a perfect example.
Please.
And he's not going to like that I'm going to say this,
Yeah.
but I'm going to use him as my example. So we had a guy that was in our troop, and he was a stellar performer. But what he was doing was he was running his team too hard, so they didn't have time to recover. They didn't have, it was hard to set up backside support to get them the good training, because every day was like a Sergeant Major Day event. They were running it just crazy. So I'm the Troop Sergeant Major, and Tim's the Troop Commander. And as NCOs, we sometimes lose sight of our focus, because we should be focusing on doing what good NCOs should be doing. And sometimes we get too close to the people that we're supposed to be doing that with. So this guy was very, very good friend of mine. I put him through selection, and now here he is on my team, and now he's in my troop, and now he's a team leader. And the problem was he was failing as a leader, even though he's doing all these great things. He was failing because his guys couldn't refit. The leadership couldn't back up what he wanted to do, and his guys were getting kind of pissed off about this. And Tim came to me and he said, hey, you need to counsel this dude, and you need to counsel him hard. And I'm like, but he's like, no. Do you remember that?
You write about this in your book?
Yeah, I wrote about it in my book.
But Tim's anonymous. Now you know who it was.
Yeah, so now you know who it was. So I sat down. We both sat down with this guy, and I said, hey, man, you're doing a good job. However, and I went through the 3 or 4 things where he was failing. And I was only doing this because rank still makes a difference even at the highest levels of the unit, And he had laid it out like, you got to counsel this guy. So I counseled him. And what do you think he did? Do you think that guy stood up and said, screw you, and stormed out of there? And no. Within like 2 or 3 days, he had fixed every one of those deficiencies that he'd had. So once again, so what do you see? We get too close. You get a leader that comes from another element, from first group at the time, right? You came from first group to the unit.
West Point.
Oh, from West Point.
Yeah.
Okay, you've been in first group before that with the riding crop and that whole thing. Do you know that story about the riding crop? Okay, yeah. Everybody should know about him. Yeah. That happened. I saw
My
that.
children may listen to
Oh,
this.
okay.
There's so much blushing going on right
With
now.
a
Because it's
reflective
amazing.
belt, I believe. And Kyle, you know what? If you really want to go there, I heard this story actually from well before I ever knew Tim. And it was from a guy that became my team sergeant on my ODA, actually, who had been in 1-1 at the time. Anyways, we'll have to.
So what I guess what I'm getting at is sometimes as
Must be true.
Special Forces NCOs, we get a little bit too tight. And I'm not saying that's bad, because you're going to go eat, sleep, breathe, fight, and die with these guys. However, you got to remember that the most important thing in that all those things I just said is leadership. You got to lead those dudes. And if you can't get it right, you got to have somebody that comes from the outside, either a new NCO or a new officer that comes to your unit and says, hey man, you need to tighten this up. And that was, to me, because as you can hear, Tim doesn't say a ton, but when he does, we were all like,
People listen.
Yeah, you listen because this dude's got a lot of information to pass on to us, and that was something I've passed on literally thousands of times in seminars because I should have known that as an NCO. I should have already fixed that problem.
No, that's a good point though, because sometimes squaring or doing the best or right by that guy is holding him accountable.
Oh, yeah.
And like we've all screwed it up in soft, right? Because we're like, oh man, okay, I want to be liked. I don't want to be that dude. But no, the reality is, as a leader, holding that guy accountable is the best thing for him and the best thing for the unit because we don't hold people accountable. Screw them
Can we
over.
talk about that for a few minutes? Because here's the question. What do you guys think, especially when it comes to Green Berets and counseling and accountability?
We suck at it.
Okay, that's my premise, is that we don't do a very good job of either.
And all of us have screwed it up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, even those that are very good at it have screwed it up and learned. And I once again, if you're a little bit separated from those guys, it will make it easier because then you look at it more as a math problem than as a friendship, type deal there. So
I think one of the important things you kind of hit on though is you look across the RSOF companies, whether it's CA, PSYOP, or Special Forces, you're going to have those that are the top performers, right? And they highlight, they show, they are crushing it in a sense, and you can give them missions, fire or forget, whether it's a training mission or operational mission. But I think one of the things you're kind of honing in on here is, in the maintenance or kind of the caring of that team, you sometimes have to hold them back a little bit and make sure that they are being taken care of and they have that time to refit and they're not continuing to outrun themselves so that they can come back, reflect, continue to learn, and then they can go back on that next mission and then go out and crush it once more.
yeah, and probably one thing I'm going to disagree with you on that is
Sure.
high performers. I would take hard workers all day long over high performers because usually the high performers are not performing as a teammate, as a team member.
Great
Not
point.
all of them. There's some that are amazing, but then there's also some that it's kind of an una via type thing. And I just know that, man, there's some guys that work really, really hard, and they're the dude that when you turn right or left, they're going to be there with you.
Grinders.
Yeah, they're going to be doing it. So
Nope, I like that. I think that's a great way to look at it too. And it's how do you kind of measure that? I'm not sure. It kind of depends on that specific scenario, that specific team, or what you guys are getting after. But
well, I think the way that you measure it is we take that person and we put them in a stressful situation, and we go through that process as though it's a combat mission, and we see how they perform. And if they're off doing their own thing and not part of a team, then put somebody else in charge that's going to be part of the team, and we're going to be much more successful as a team than we are as individuals.
Very
This
much
is the
so.
way it is.
Let's
Nope,
let
I
that
like that.
segue into the next topic here then, because this is fascinating. So there's in the civilian world right now that they have hard versus soft skills discussion, right? Which is kind of exactly what you're talking about. You said you prefer the hard worker over the high performer any day, right? So when it comes to best hiring practice, what I've seen in a couple companies lately is they're talking about, okay, do we want that guy that can do this job really well? He can do all these things specifically, or do we want the person who has a positive attitude and he can take accountability for his actions? So it comes down to the hard worker versus the person that is really skilled at this very specific thing. So kind of like to get everybody's input on the difference between those hard skills and soft skills, and what does it really look like when we're selecting people, or we're hiring people, or just day to day when we're dealing with people? Like, what are we really looking for there, and how does that tie into being a leader?
I'll jump in. I've got a few thoughts on that. I think the best way to approach that is really the philosophy of what are you buying versus what are you building, right? You can buy certain raw materials in order to build something, the sum of which is greater than all of its parts, right? So I think it really just depends, on the specific job, and I think it depends on the organization for which you're hiring. I don't think there's a cookie cutter approach, because just like leadership, it has to be tailored and scaled, right, and applied appropriately. But specifically for each of those instances, I think you have to think about what it is that you really need when you break it down. What is the raw material that you need, right, in order to do that specific task? What are those, I guess in the Army terms, what are those, the knowledge and skills, attributes, behaviors, things of that nature. But I would offer that In many times, in my experience, about 20 years in this SF regiment, that those soft skills, right? Hiring character, right? Hiring character beats hiring someone who can just do a task, someone who's capable in a specific set of skills, because now you're getting all of that risk with someone that doesn't have character. It's a lot easier to forge hard skills than it is to build character. And I'd buy character any day of the week.
So Warren Buffett says he hires people for 3 qualities: character, intellect, and energy. And if you get the first one wrong, the other 2 are fatal.
Yeah, that's such a tricky question, because you want to have the right people, and we honestly, if somebody knew the answer to this, we'd all be successful. I mean, Chick-fil-A is the only people that have really figured it out. They got
The Lord's chicken.
yeah, they're awesome. I mean, wherever you go, they're awesome. So it's something to do with their hiring
It's
process.
culture, though, too, right? That
Yeah.
ties to culture.
Yeah.
But they're also so selective in their hiring process and then their franchising process too.
Well, and they hold people accountable. 'Cause
True.
guess what? My son worked at Chick-fil-A for about 2 years. It's one of the best things we ever did. You know what I mean? Because I couldn't get him to
So what if
be very respectful. But
One
my
of
point
the-
is they held him accountable to their standards there.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to highlight, though, is when we say somebody's a hard worker, that doesn't mean they don't give 110%. Because a lot of guys will say, well, we need people. Well, yeah, the hard worker is the person that gives 110%. A lot of times the top performers, they don't, because they're good at their little piece of the pie, but they're not good at anything else.
And
So
they
then-
stick to that piece of the pie.
Right, and they stick to that piece of the pie.
Yeah.
The thing we got to remember when we hire people that give 110% every day, and you guys know exactly what I'm talking about when I say they also give 110% when they're not working.
Yeah.
So when we hire special forces guys, if you're hiring somebody because they're well behaved, that's not the person we're talking about. You got to be the person that has a little ADHD. You can't focus. You've been incarcerated, maybe not inside the continental United States, but outside of the United States. That's the person I want to manage as a leader. I want somebody that, man, I can just barely keep the reins on them, because when you let their head go, they're just going to go. And that's what we all want, ultimately. One of the things when Tim was our boss, he looked at everybody. He let us do our jobs. And that's why he was so very well respected in our troop and in the squadron, in the unit, was because he let the men do their jobs. And then he spoke when he needed to speak, versus a lot of guys will be, they're chattering the whole time and you just kind of tune them out. When this joker talked, there was nobody interrupted, because, he'd either beat you up or he's going to say something that was really, really important. And that's, and that was usually the case. So,
So while we're kind of talking about that, and I think we hit on failure a little bit and learning through failure. How would you gentlemen, recommend in your organizations that you encourage failure? You encourage people to learn through failure in an organization, and it's okay to fail. How do you approach that?
I think you've got to, more than just say it, you've got to show some action behind it, right? You've got to make sure that audio matches the video, and that you show your people that you're willing to accept failure, as long as we learn from it, right? In both word and in deed. I think failure is central to leadership in itself, in that, pick a word like that you would use to describe a leader. Everyone has their own words, to choose in describing, their version of the ideal leader. For me, I think of humility. Humility is a central word that I use to describe a leader. And for me, how does that tie into failure? Well, humility is that kind of tacit acknowledgement of imperfection, right? And knowing that you're incomplete and that you're not perfect and that you're going to fail, and accepting that from the outset. And then another great word I think used to describe, an ideal leader is perseverance, right? And being able to, in spite of failure, continue on and continue to persist and endure despite those setbacks, those challenges, and that adversity. If I was going to use a third word, I'd say being proactive. And proactive, is about creating those opportunities or seizing those opportunities, however risky they are, being willing to accept risk and assume risk, because therein lies an opportunity. And where there is potential success, there's also potential failure, right? And so failure then is woven into all three of those characteristics of leadership, I think, and is a central part of it. So if you have a leader who knows that he's imperfect, who knows that perfection is an unattainable goal, but we strive for it anyway, who knows that there is just as much risk of failure as there is success, and who knows that no matter what, I'm still going to keep charging forward. They're going to build people in that organization and get them to feel comfortable just as they are with that risk. And so I think what you end up with is, I think in the military, there's two types of people in this world.
You're going to steal it from me, Sean. I'm getting ready to say it. Go
All right, jump in because you probably say it better than me. Go for it. Two types of people.
Well, I was
two
going to
types
talk
of
about
leaders.
success seekers versus failure avoiders.
You got it. Go for it. Run with it.
All right. Well, I'm sorry to cut you off, man.
Oh,
you
you're
were
good.
ripping good.
You're good. That's a tee up.
I was gonna. Yeah, I like to categorize leader in two ways. There's success seekers and there's failure avoiders. And I think we all know the difference, right? And the success seekers are the ones that aren't afraid to fail. They tolerate failure. They tolerate failure from subordinates. You know what I mean? They're looking for people to push the envelope, right? And they know when you push the envelope, you're going to fail occasionally, but that's how people learn, right? And then you got the failure avoiders who are afraid to fail. So they don't test themselves. They don't allow others to fail. And usually what's the difference? It's the way they view the world, I think. And a lot of times the success seekers are the people that Tim spoke about, who see the world and what they do through the lens of others and the people that they work with and that work for them, and through the lens of the organization, what's going to make them better and their interests and not their own self-interests. And the failure avoiders are typically the ones who are more self-interested. What does it mean for me? What's in it for me? What's in it for my career? They're the ones who are usually not going to tolerate failure. They're not going to want to take chances because they're afraid of what could impact on them. And that's kind of the way I characterize it.
Amen.
Jim, what were you going to say?
Not something that these guys didn't already say. What came across my mind was, as a leader, how willing are you to fail? And how far do you push that? And I think you push that until you are visibly and noticeably uncomfortable. But you also need to know where to cut it off.
That's right.
Because there have been a few times
That's right.
where, as the responsible leader, letting your people, run it out at the ragged edge, but it's also your job to see maybe a disaster coming and jumping in ahead of it. So it's a very fine line. And
and I think so. One of the things that Tim did when he was troop commander, so he could segregate himself from the actual assaulters on the ground and keep track of all the big picture stuff that's going on. You can't get mentally drug into that, because then all of a sudden you're trying to have the anger that the dudes that are entering the breach have, and that doesn't work as a leader. As a leader, you've got to be able to pull yourself back from that and make the correct decisions. And I know that when I'm down there doing my thing, he's the one literally making sure that we don't screw something up, because with Jesse and I running around the battlefield, bad things are bound to happen. And I think that, like he just said, you want them to walk that ragged edge, but you as a leader have got to be responsible enough to say, stop. This is as far as we can go, so that we don't, get guys killed or whatever it might be.
And I think the art, though, is knowing what that point is and what that threshold is. And I also think there's a difference, when you're in combat on the live fire two-way range, that's not the time you want to try a new TTP necessarily. But in training and things like that, that is the time.
Yeah, is it art though? Is it art or is it training?
Well, I don't think it's a science necessarily.
I think
you know what I mean?
So
I don't know if it's one of those things that I think through training and maybe repetition and things like that, and even through studying history, right? Like you start to get a sense of, and through experience of how far that line can be.
Yeah, and what did you
pushed.
just say? Experience.
Yeah.
Experience.
Yeah. But how do you
Experience.
get
That's
experience?
Right. So how do we get experience? We get that through training.
Yeah.
And seeing that over and over and over, or we go to combat and we see that over and over as a junior NCO or a junior officer, and then all of a sudden now you're in that position. He knows what's going on. He knows exactly what's happening in the building. It's not like he doesn't have a clue, but all the big pieces that keep us from crashing and burning, making sure that as a leader, he's in control of that. And then me as a troop sergeant major, making sure that I'm doing the little pieces that I've got to do, because we all have jobs to do.
Yeah.
As long as you're in that position and you've trained at it, and he knows what his job is, he also knows what my job is. I know what my job is, and his, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think though, just going back to, it's about people getting out of their comfort zones.
Yeah.
And so like if you want to grow as a person or as an organization, whatever, you have to keep getting outside your comfort zone.
Like if you're not prepared to fail, you're not prepared to excel.
I don't know.
But it's true.
Brilliant. Chuck Ritter.
No, it's not me.
Patent it right now.
www.
Yeah.
chuckritter.com.
But I know, like, for example, in a small tactical example, but how do you teach people how to shoot faster?
Make them fail.
Make them fail, right? I think
Yeah.
you say, like, you got to until the wheels start coming off,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
but guys are going to be reluctant to do that because they don't want to miss or they don't want to
Yeah.
throw rounds, right? So hey, it's okay. The only way you're going to learn to shoot faster is by what? Shooting faster, right?
Yeah.
And then you dial it back a little bit, right? Until you get it in there.
It's okay to fail. It's just not okay to be defeated, right? Figure it. Perseverance.
I would say
Yeah.
failure is temporary. You know what I mean? It's not, like nothing is final. Very few things are final except for death.
Okay, so we've talked about essentially continuing to learn and learning through failure and how failure is okay in our organizations and encouraging that. What about once you're at that peak level performance for your teams or in a leadership setting? And the reason I bring this up, Chuck and I have talked, through James Kerr's book Legacy pretty frequently, and looking at say sports teams or dynasties. Once they get to that championship and they're performing at a very high peak level as a team, as a cohesive unit, there's always the need to continue to adapt. Otherwise, from that competitive stance, they're going to get targeted. They're going to get their plays, their play calling, their strategy will be figured out from their opponents and dissected quite a bit. But what about us in that leadership setting? How do we continue once we're at that very high level to continue to adapt? And what would you guys what would your takeaways for
What
that?
he says is when you're on top of your game, change your games. You don't just change it when you're sucking. You got to change it when you're up here as well.
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to that phrase like complacency kills. So number one, like you got to stay humble as an individual and as an organization too. Like never feel like you've arrived as a person. You know what I mean? As a leader, you should always strive to get better. As an organization, I think you should always strive to get better. Never be satisfied with the status quo. And as soon as you start thinking that, I've made it or I know everything. I mean, to me, that's a big warning sign. Like red star cluster should be going off on an individual level and an organizational level.
Very good, Kyle.
Don't we, talk about the self-licking ice cream cone here, the military. They do a hot wash, AAR, whatever they call it. What are the two categories?
Yeah, sustains and improves.
Why?
Three up and three down.
Why do we have sustains?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
That's a waste of time.
That's right.
It's total waste of time. That's all slapping ourselves on the back versus what we need to fix. And I think so right from the beginning, you're breeding that in to young NCOs and officers because sustains, that's ridiculous.
So can we pull that thread some more, Kyle? And,
Yeah.
and the reason I say that is this, and I'll hear what Sean or Bobby or Chuck thinks. I would like to hear more about how the unit does AARs and hot washes, because that's my understanding is it's brutal, right? And it's looking towards
Boss, why don't you handle
it's
that
looking towards like, hey, what did we screw up? You know what I mean? And accountability, individually. My experience in SF is this: a lot of SF guys, I hate to say it, are thin-skinned, right? So they only yes, believe it or not, they
Yeah.
only want to talk
Wait,
about
what?
what
You
went
wanna hear a secret?
well, and not what they screwed up or what they need to improve on. So
I'll tell you a
oftentimes it's a
secret.
big high five ceremony.
The dudes in the unit are thin-skinned too,
Okay.
but they've been trained.
Yeah.
So I'd like to hear
But
your
it's culture, I
perspective,
think. Go ahead.
boss, on that, because when you look at it as the positions you were in, what did you think of the AAR process in the unit?
Well, I'd like to just kind of tweak that a little bit and just say, okay, what is the anatomy of a good AAR, right? And we've already kind of covered it, but it's brutal honesty with what didn't go right. And then you actually have to do something about it.
Yeah.
Right? It's not, oh yeah, that was good point. Yeah. okay, well, what are we going to do about it? And
So
you have to write stuff
Yeah,
down. You
exactly.
have to follow up. How does a lessons learned process actually help advance an organization? How does it actually affect change? And who is responsible for following up and ensuring that change takes place? Now, some things may be very niche in their application, so you don't need to change a whole organization or a whole TTP. But what I see a lot is there's a lot of lip service. And then I would just say one other thing that was a little tidbit before I took command, and it was advice from an NCO. And I kind of said, hey, what's the secret to success? And what he said to me was very interesting, and that's why I remember it to this day. He said, never be afraid of the why, right? Why did we do it like this? Why did you do it like that? Why didn't you do it this way? And what I'm getting to is not just don't be afraid of standing up in front of a bunch of people and letting them ask you why questions, but don't be offended by it.
Yeah.
Right?
Don't take it
That's your
personally.
job as a leader to explain things to your people.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, I'll
No,
I'll
go ahead.
finish
No,
real
go
quick.
ahead.
You're on a roll.
The parts of the AR where I used to be the most amazed is when the lowest ranking guy in the organization can ask the senior guy present why he made a decision. And that leader, not even blinking an eye, you don't hear stress in his voice, you don't see anger flash across his face. You just see him matter-of-factly answering the question. And a lot of times, what you get is,
Yep.
I didn't see it like that. I didn't think about it like that. I didn't look at it from your optic. So that's one thing that has always stuck with me is don't be afraid to be criticized or challenged or asked why you did something. Don't be that thin-skinned. It's your job.
And that's kind of where I was going with what you said. So you say, why does SF have that, but the unit? Well, the reason the unit...
It's culture.
But they all have that when they show up.
Sure.
And that's human nature because you don't want to be wrong.
But they conform to the culture.
They have to or they get fired.
Yes.
And what's nice about that is every person that's in that room that has been through the same training.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing that makes a big difference. If you took every SF guy from every ODA and you put him through that same training, guess what? It'd be the same. It would be the same outcome. I promise you that, because the guys that you're hiring in SF, they're not stupid. They're, the guys in the unit might be a little bit different. Their psychological makeup might be slightly different, but it's not necessarily in a good way.
That's right. But
So
I think it's the same in a lot of ways. But I think people
Well,
people
no,
conform.
it's not. No, it's not. Because if you take a high performer,
Yeah.
a high performer does not like to be criticized.
Yeah.
So a high performer
Well-
makes it through SFAS, and then another high performer makes it through the unit selection, and that high performer hates being told they're wrong. And the first thing that we do when we get there is we tell them they're wrong.
Yeah.
And we tell them that every day, over and over and over and over, until they understand that we only tell them they're wrong
Here's
when they're wrong.
Here's what I think. People who are insecure hate to be criticized.
Yeah. Yep.
And so the people that Tim speak to, I think they're secure, right?
Yeah.
In who they are and in their leadership or whatever, and in their role. You know what I mean? And therefore they're not offended or insulted by the lowest guy in the formation asking them a question. In fact, so I'm going to try to synthesize because so as part of the SWCS pre-command course, the USSI pre-command course, Bobby brings in some leaders from across industry, right? Very successful, military and civilian, right? And they talk about leadership qualities, this, that, and the other thing. And I sat in on the last one. And the two common threads that I heard were across everyone who spoke. One, it was all about people, right? You've got to like make your people your priority. And then two, it was about trust. You know, you've got, and so then it was like, well, how do you gain trust? Well, here's how you gain trust. Usually, here's how a leader gains trust. It's through being authentic. And I think through having a high level of integrity too, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you gain trust with your people? It's just like Tim talked about, I think, right? Like when you expose yourself or you actually admit flaws or mistakes, you're like, damn, man, I didn't think about that. Shit, that's a good idea. We'll fix that for next time. People are going to trust you because you're showing that you're human. You know what I mean? That we all make mistakes. None of us have it right, you know, and we're willing to take input from anyone if they've got a good idea. And I think that's how you build trust in an organization.
The other thing that goes hand in hand with what you're saying is if you believe as a leader that you're the smartest person in that room, you already have failed.
Yeah.
And we saw that when we would have individuals that thought they were the smartest person in the troop or in the squadron, they're pretty much done at that point because you don't know who you're talking to. That lowest person, maybe they're not any smarter, but they have a fresh set of eyeballs on the problem. Man, they'd come up with ideas that we would never, Tim and I could have sat there for days. We would have never come up with the ideas that some of those other jokers came up with. So, and then once they come up with an idea, think about it and go, man, that's a really good idea. Like the taxi cabs. You know, we couldn't get the vehicles we needed, so we made our own taxis. Well, then we were having a problem because they could always ID that. They could always ID that we were Americans. Remember how we fixed that? We put a dude in the back dressed as a chick. Guess what? We could drive anywhere and nobody paid a bit of attention. He didn't come up with that idea. I didn't come up with that idea. Not the lowest guy in the totem pole, but, well, I should say the highest because I was informed in Indian culture it's actually the lowest person is the most respected. So the highest person on the totem pole came up with that idea, not a leader. But Tim didn't say, no, you can't do that.
I wanted to recapture just for the record, because it may have been worth the price of admission for this podcast, but what Tim said, the anatomy of a good AAR. Number one, brutal honesty about what you didn't do right. Step one. Step two, the most important step, you have to do something about it. Or else it's meaningless, right? Well, you got to write it down. But look, if you don't do anything, and this goes back to another, I think, principle of leadership that we all know, at the end of the day, actions speak louder than words. So we've all seen the people who talk a lot, but then their actions aren't aligned with what they say. And it's almost better to say nothing and let your actions speak for themselves, I think. And that's what another thing that resonates and I think builds trust with subordinates too, when they see you actually walk the talk. Or you just don't even talk, you just walk.
But then you've got to train enough that when you walk out of that room with your little green notebook and you've got the three things that your team jacked up, it's not getting filed like Tim said. It's not getting put away. Yeah. It's in your notebook.
It goes on the portal.
Yeah. No, it doesn't go on the portal. It goes in your brain. And the next week, you train on that. And that's where, in the regular military, that's where these guys suffer. They don't, they got all kinds of training going on, but none of it applies to combat. So that's important as well. You can't fix the problem unless you retrain with what you're trying to fix.
So for the civilian listeners who may be listening out there real quick, the portal is this place like on our websites that things go to never be seen, nor found, nor heard from again.
They're hung on the portal.
You want to hear a quick war story on that? Yeah. So they brought desktop computers into the team room. Every team room was going to now have a desktop computer. Now for you guys, you're like, yeah, of course. Well, in those days, there was no computers. The troop sergeant major and troop commander didn't even have computers.
Wow. When I first came in ODA, we had two computers, team leader and team sergeant.
So they brought these computers in there and they put one on Matt Ryerson's team room table. And Matt was killed on the 5th, I believe, 5th of October, 93. He got hit by a mortar. Yeah. And he was just like, this is amazing. I've been waiting for this. This is awesome. And we're going, Matt Ryerson's like the biggest knuckle dragon dude on the planet. And yeah, he had the huge mustache. The guy was amazing. And he's like, yeah, it's awesome. So we thought he was just making fun, whatever. We walked into his team room and he had that computer set up and it was shut off. and he had all of his sticky notes stuck to the screen of the computer. And he's like, now I got a place to put my sticky notes. He never turned that computer on. He would just put his sticky notes on the screen of the computer.
And you know
That's
what? It
awesome.
worked.
It worked. It worked. It definitely worked.
Hey, one thing, I know you want to move on, but one thing that you said, maybe you didn't mean it in the way that I'm going to talk about
I'm
it.
getting called out by Tim.
Oh, yeah.
Watch out.
You're not.
Okay.
You're not. But it's a point I want to
should,
make.
though.
Yeah, I
Because
know.
I have seen and heard this over and over throughout my career. It's something I struggle with as a young officer, a mid-grade officer. And if what I say right now can help any leader at any stage of their career, I want to do that. And it's this thought. Leading by example is a foundational leadership thing that you must get right.
Yes,
But it is not enough.
I agree.
It is not enough. And you said that point, but I want to make the follow-up and the foot stomp of, and again, I told you, I struggle with this. You got to find your voice some way, somehow. And I remember I've had leaders that have tried to pull it out of me, and I resisted. I'm not that guy. I don't want to be a springbutt. I don't want to be seen as that guy.
Yeah.
I don't want to be viewed as the kiss ass. But right is right. And if you see wrong, you got to call it out. Everybody has heard this saying before. What you let happen in your presence is your standard.
You get what you tolerate.
Yeah,
Your culture is set by the most egregious thing you allow to happen.
right. And so much, especially within our force, I see us see something wrong and not say it and not call it out. And we need to get that right.
Yep.
Okay.
Amen.
I also think, though, so as the junior member in this room right now at the Falcon Snail Pub,
Waging.
you know, getting these, you know, these nuggets and understanding leadership wise, it goes both ways, though, right? So we're talking about trust, we're talking about ground truth and honesty, but that also goes up. That also goes to those mid-level, you know, those detachment commanders going up to the company command team, the battalion command team, of one, holding people accountable, maybe not calling them out in public, but saying, hey, here's something that I witnessed or I'm observing, and here's what I think is in the best interest of our unit, but also advising up. Leadership goes both directions too. And I think that's something that's difficult because the Army or the military is so hierarchical with rank and structure. But I think in special operations, it's very well tolerated and appreciated is that leadership and ground truth and honesty and that feedback has to go up as well. Because I imagine, again, just a lowly major here, I imagine once you get to higher levels, kind of 06 level, 07 level command teams, you know, it's probably a little lonely at the top maybe, and you don't get the most feedback because you may not get the most honest feedback. You're getting maybe what you want to hear from the organization. And I just want to kind of bring
negative
it up.
one officer points for common sense.
But the key is that you have to foster an environment that allows candid feedback and allows that to come up. So we say before, hey, actions speak louder than words. I think I've seen it before personally, where we had a commander come in. It was like, hey, I'm all about candor. I want to hear the truth. I want to hear from the guy on the ground. Tell us what we're screwed up, blah, 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 blah. So the first commanders conference we had, one of my buddy team leaders stood up and was like, hey, sir, this is screwed. I got an issue with this, and this. Well, he got blown up in place publicly by everybody. And the guy quickly sat down. And then the commander was like, all right, who else has something? What else you got?
Nope.
That was it. You know what I mean? No one said a word after that. No one ever did for the next 2 years because he said one thing, but his actions were completely something else.
Yeah, and I think sometimes folks think that when we talk about these AARs and we want to let the lowest guy have input, that's true. But on the ground, when we're in combat, there's no talking, there's no discussing. It's got to happen right now.
And that's not the time for that to happen.
Yeah. So, but some people think, oh, well, we're gonna have this. No, we're not having a discussion.
No.
It's time to enter this building.
Yeah.
We're gonna enter this building.
Yeah, we'll talk about it afterwards.
Yeah. So
What you want is an environment where every man or woman feels like they are empowered to assume a leadership role at any time.
Yep.
That's how you get the young E6 that is able to speak truth to power and, not be nervous about it. To understand that the entire culture of the organization kind of stands behind him or her to be able to make their point, to be heard.
Well, oddly enough, Jim, that is the next topic I wanted to segue into right there, is that being a leader, but setting that culture, even if you're not in a leadership role, the difference in being a leader, well, there's no difference in being in a leadership position. Anybody can be a leader, right? And doing the things, even if you see something right or wrong, doesn't require you just to be in that position. Now, when you're in that position, you're required to do it. But I want to talk about that, being a leader versus being in a leadership role, right? Let's talk about that one first. Let's just throw that one out there. I think that ties in exactly what you're saying is you can be a leader at any point in time. Anytime, even if you're not in a position, you're just standing by not doing anything, you're also being a detriment to the culture, in my opinion.
Well, you're private. You show up, hip pocket training, you take charge and you train your guys, right? At least that's what we were taught to do. We didn't always do it, but we should have been always doing that. And that just lets those younger guys say, yeah, I'm in charge right now. If you're in charge of yourself, you're not really a leader. But if you got one more private EIEIOU one, well, then you're in charge. We've got to foster that mentality and let them learn how to lead as young leaders and let them fail so that they can move up into those positions and become, continue to be good leaders or great leaders. Does that answer that? Does that go down the right avenue there?
I don't know. I think that people confuse it, right? That people are like, oh, well, I'm not in that position, so I'm not a leader, right?
But,
no, anybody can be a leader, right? It goes by your actions, about what you're doing every day to inspire and change people around you, right?
Right. When I was a lieutenant, I went in for my counseling from my battalion commander.
Good for him.
And I was, I think, an XO at the time. And I remember he counseled me and he said, you're not invested in your organization. You need to feel like you're a plank owner. And I'm like, what's that? What is he talking about? But as I, talked to a couple people and tried to figure out what he was saying, is kind of just to your point. In the military, you're thrust into a leadership position. A leader that does not make, not necessarily, right? And as we've been discussing, anybody in the organization, if so empowered by the culture or by the situation, right? You could have sheer chaos. Nobody's in charge, but leaders pop up and emerge. But in the military, because you're put in that position, you don't naturally come with credibility. That has to be earned. And then that's where we start talking about the different attributes, leadership attributes, the humility. Do you have someone else's best interest at heart? Are you a good teacher? Are you a good coach? Are you a good mentor? But you have to earn it. It's not just given to you, and you can't pretend at it, because we all know no matter what you try to pretend to be, the real you shines through.
Yep.
No matter what. And it's funny because in the military, me included, we become so guarded over our reputation. But our reputation is just what people think of you. It's your social media, right? And how many phony social medias are out there. But what really matters is who you are in the dark, what you do when no one's watching.
Yeah.
And, we all make mistakes.
Yep.
But do you have enough of those attributes? Do you have enough of that firm grounding that gives you the resilience that gives you that ability to be a good leader, to help you get back on course, right? And then can you admit it?
Yeah.
Can you admit it? That's that whole thing, that whole Brene Brown, thing on vulnerability, which seems like a sissy word, but that's what we're talking about.
And that speaks to authenticity, I think, right?
Yeah.
Like when you're your real person, who you are, and trying to be two split personalities. People have good bullshit detectors, I think. And so soldiers or whoever works for you or amongst you, they know. You know what I mean? If they've been around a person long enough, they know if they're putting on a front. You know what I mean? Versus who they really are, and we sniff those people out pretty quickly. You know what I mean? I think that's what resonates with people and leaders, are people who can be authentic and they can be vulnerable, and that speaks to that leader too. Man, if a guy's at whatever echelon, he's willing to take advice publicly or get criticism from the lowest ranking guy in the formation, that speaks to a certain level of humility and vulnerability, where you're willing to at least take that. You know what I mean? Whether you agree with it or not may be a different discussion.
Last week somebody told me in their headshot, you know what the secret of leadership is? And they Googled me and said, being an authentically good person. That's the secret.
I just think that resonates with humans in general, right? Just people that are real. And I'll just, oftentimes I think the military, for what culturally can foster a culture of people who try to portray one image, but it may not be really who that person really is. You know what I mean?
So touching on that human aspect of leadership, some leaders are more concerned, I think, about their legacy, and how they define their legacy is a litany of things they accomplished, whether that's something they physically did or decisions they influenced. But what I ask myself is, does any of that really matter? How permanent is any of that? And I think when you look back, as each of us look back on our experience as a leader, what we left behind probably wasn't the things that we did, the trips we were on, the missions we were on. The real mark, of our leadership was, how did we make our people feel? Because that's how we're really remembered. We're not remembered for this one thing we did or a list of things we did. We're remembered for how we made our people feel in all directions, those above us, those below us, those around us. So that just ties into that whole humanity. Like the more human you are as a leader, the more real, lasting, profound impact you'll have. That'll be more durable than any other material accomplishment you made.
Yeah, I think your legacy is truly going to be those subordinate leaders that move up and take leadership positions, and maybe they learn something from you, and maybe they learn what not to do, because there's some pretty crappy leaders out there as well. I mean, not in special forces, of course, but in the SEALs. And no, you know what I mean. It's. I look at the guys that followed behind me, and I hope that that some of that legacy is from the things that we did when we were in leadership positions. But at that point, you're move out smartly to your next job there, I guess.
Can I bring one thing up real quick? Just because we're talking about leadership and then accountability. And I think we all agree, I believe too, yes, anyone can be a leader for sure. And now this is going to kind of get officer centric, but you talk about
Give him a point. Just
centric. Yeah. I'm trying to, what am I up to now? I got at least 8? Come on, man. At least got to get double digits. Wait till I'm done with this one. We get a triple double. But when you're a command, with great power comes great responsibility. And so at the end of it, commanders then become responsible for, it's the whole thing. Hey, everything the unit does or fails to do. And what I want to bring up is, Kyle, you speak to it in your book. You are a veteran of that experience. You were there, right? But if we want to talk about Mogadishu on October 3rd, 1993, and a mission that, whatever, it was a successful mission at the end of the day, but it was characterized politically and everything as a failure, whatever. But what did the commander of that task force do in the aftermath of that mission?
He wrote a letter to Congressman Murtha.
Yep.
And he said that.
And he wrote it. He didn't write it on a computer, did he?
No, he wrote it by hand.
Uh-huh.
And it said, the authority, responsibility, and how do you say it? The authority and responsibility all rest right here
Yeah.
with the Task Force Ranger Commander.
Yeah, he says that for
That
this
was the
mission,
first
the
bullet
president
that
and
he
the
sent,
Secretary of Defense need to be taken off the blame line. Like
That
all,
was but that was number 13.
I got it. Yeah, he had 13.
It was. I mean, it really
Yeah.
was. You'll see that in my presentation.
Yeah,
But that's a great point, because here's General Garrison.
that's right. So
He's
we're talking
one of
about General William F. Garrison. You can look him up
Yeah.
online.
Yeah,
Another legend.
Absolutely. And talk about credibility.
Yeah,
Accountability, credibility, they kind of walk hand in hand there. But
100%. But so that's an amazing, I think, an example, right? Of a leader who, what they do at the end of the day, the good ones we know is they take accountability. It's a, timeless, simple things. Lead by example. When things are going really well, what do? You pass credit on to others. You know what I mean? When things go wrong, you take the blame and the responsibility, and you don't pass the buck. And sometimes for what it's worth.
in that letter, he also said the planning was ground up plan, from bottom up planning. However, then he finished that paragraph. He said, however, the Task Force Ranger Commander made the final decision.
Yeah.
So even when he was telling those folks exactly what happened, and number 13 is why it became a public document, is because he said Clinton and Aspen were taken off the blame line.
My point is, for what it's worth, these days it seems when things go wrong, sideways, downrange, or whatever, there seems to be a lot of, instead of people stepping up and saying, "Hey, that's me, I own that, I got it," it's the opposite. It's a lot of maybe deflecting, finger pointing. Hey, that wasn't me, that was somebody else, or whatever, at various echelons. You know what I mean? And that just seems to be lost these days, for what it's worth.
Yeah, if you fail, it's your fault as the leader.
Yeah.
If it's your ultimately your fault. I speak to law enforcement a lot, and law enforcement.
That's why you're in that position.
It's even more evident because there's a lot less people, so you don't lose somebody in the chaff like you do in the military with so many people. But it's ultimately, if you didn't fire the right person because you didn't want to hurt somebody's feelings, then
You own it.
yeah, you got to own it, because you should have stepped up and did the job.
And that's just, I think that's what resonates when things go sideways, whatever, even if you weren't directly responsible, when a leader steps up to the plate and says to their higher authority, whoever that is, "Hey, that's on me, I got it." The guys beneath them see that. And I think that earns trust and respect and all those things as well.
Well, I think as a subordinate in a unit, each one of us can probably look and see and say, yep, that's the leader that took responsibility for something that didn't go right, provided top cover, had responsibility and accountability for it, and took it, but also we're there to kind of protect the soldiers, because that is their responsibility to make that decision and take ownership of something that was a success or failure for the organization. So yeah.
I think the other side of that too is you see this sometimes on teams, that somebody does something and they don't get punished. That's the other time it's just as bad.
Yeah.
If somebody's got to be punished, they got to be punished, and that's the way it is.
Hard question. While we're sitting here with a group of 06s and E9s, do you guys have any vignettes off the top of your heads of personal failures that you could talk about, or personal instances where things didn't go as planned and you learned from that, but learned it kind of after the fact and were able to kind of bounce back from that?
Yes, I'll crack the seal.
Okay, over to you, Sean.
All right. So I will use a personal example, so I'm not diming out someone else, right? So I know some of these people are still around, so I don't want to name names. We all have stories about people that are burned in my mind. I've got about 10 examples just itching to come out. After this podcast is over, we might talk some more. But I'll use my own personal example, right? Just back to vulnerability, right? And just throwing myself out there. Hey, here I was this time when I failed. I'll tell you that one thing we haven't talked about yet is that I think the thing that got you right to whatever leadership position or role that you assume, the things that made you successful to get you to that point aren't necessarily going to be the same things that make you successful in that new leadership role, right? Which gets back to that humility, understand that you're incomplete, that you need to grow, right? And that you need to change your game, right? In order to stay in the game, right? And to still be competitive to win. And so there I was, I'd just been selected to be an E9. And I realized that the things that had made me successful with a very small team weren't necessarily going to be the same things that made me successful with, a company, right, of special forces soldiers, and that I needed some growth and development. And I went soul searching, and I had the fortune of being in a unit that had a really amazing psychologist, an organizational psychologist that had come from the FBI and had literally been a profiler, and did this amazing 360 on me that really showed me all the things that I didn't want to confront. They gave me the brutal honesty. They gave me an amazing AAR, right? Instead of the traditional Army 360 where, you give them a list of names of people that are going to say really nice things about you, right? We took it seriously. Hey, give me 2 commanders that you loved working for. Give me 2 bosses that you can't stand. Give me 2 subordinates that would follow you to the end of the earth. Give me 2 subordinates you never, ever want to assign to you ever again. Hey, give me 2 peers, right, that would really follow you anywhere, and give me 2 pairs you never want to work with, right? And I really got an interesting, real 360 from folks that I'd want to go have a beer with and folks I'd never want to see again. But they all have something to contribute, right? They all have something that all seen a different side of me, and even the sides I didn't necessarily want to recognize. And by the end of it, I had about 4 months of interviews transpired, and I got presented an 18-page dossier on me as an individual and as a leader, and all of the holes in my swing. And I went, wow, you got me. You're absolutely right. I suck in this area. I suck in this area. So I totally avoid that. And I just had to double down, I think, on recognizing that there are some things I'm really good at, and there are some things I'm not. And what I'm going to need to do to be successful is I'm going to have to not avoid the things I'm poor at, and not necessarily waste all of my energy and time in trying to turn those weaknesses into strengths. I'm going to need to surround myself with people that are better at the things that I'm weak at. And that, I think, ties into a topic that you wanted to bring up later, and we could table that for later, but about how the BCAP and CCAP and SMAP process work in the Army. But getting a look at how you blend people together as a mosaic, right? How you blend a team together. That each of us has a different carved puzzle piece, and my slot inserts into your tab, right? And it just perfectly brings us together, and that your strengths are my weaknesses and my weaknesses are your strengths. But I had a whole lot of weaknesses, and I got to see exactly what people that I knew and some people that I liked, had to say about me with brutal honesty, right? With total anonymity, and they were hard, but they were fair, right? And so I had to have, this brutal realization with myself and stare myself in the mirror and you go, you know what? I'm imperfect. I have weaknesses, and there are some things that I'm not probably going to be able to change. But now I'm aware, right? And that's the key, I think, for a lot of people is they're unaware because no one gives them feedback, right? So if you can think of someone that you have a story about where you're like, man, this leader absolutely sucked. Did anyone ever tell him? Did anyone ever tell that leader why they sucked, how they sucked, what they thought of them? Because I'll tell you, they might be so receptive as I was when I finally got told where I sucked. I took it to heart.
So I got a power and position vignette for you. So there I was. I got called into the office toward the end of the day by a troop sergeant major, a guy we called Hunter. Rick Landreth, he passed away a couple years ago. Some of you probably knew him. He lived out here in Southern Pines. Great guy. So he's a troop sergeant major. I was a team leader on a sniper team. I get called in and he says, yeah, I got to read you in on this mission. You're going to go overseas and you're going to get the president of Montenegro. This is what you're going to do. I'm like, all right, that's cool. And he goes, but you're the low vis option. Okay, roger that. And he goes, 4 guys. What do you mean 4 guys? I got a 6-man team. Yeah, 4 dudes. So pick the 4 guys that are going and let me know. I'm like, roger that. So I picked myself because I'm the team leader. I picked the 2IC because he's the 2IC. I start looking at the rest of the guys and I think, okay, I'm gonna pick this guy. We'll call him Brian. I'm gonna pick him because he's a sharp cat. He's very, very switched on. I picked this other guy because he has an intel background. I'm not going to pick Chuck because he's got family issues right now. One of his parents was dying from cancer. And I'm not going to pick the other dude, Chili, just because I've already put these other guys together, and I'm not going to pick Chili. And I'm thinking, man, I really want to pick Chili, but I got, the team is full here. So I go tell the troop sergeant major who I'd picked. And it just immediately, when I said it, it made me sick to my stomach. And I went home that night. You guys met my wife, Melinda. She knows more about leadership than I do. So I get home. She goes, "What's wrong with you?" And I go, "Nothing. What are you talking about?" "Something's wrong with you." She could tell. I mean, our spouses, they know immediately. She goes, "Something's nagging at you?" And I said, "I had to make this decision. I had to pick guys on my team." And I didn't tell her what was happening, but I had to pick 4 guys out of my 6. She goes, "Oh, that's easy. You're going to pick yourself because you're the team leader. You're going to pick Brian because he's squared away. You're going to pick Keith because he's squared away, dude. You're going to pick Chili because he's squared away. You're not going to pick Chuck because his dad or mom's about to die of cancer. And you're not going to pick the 2IC because he's an idiot." And I'm thinking, well, she's right, but I made my decision. I picked 2IC because he's the 2IC, a position. It's a position. Doesn't mean that's the right person to lead. It's a position. And I went in the next morning. I had a really rough night, and I walked up to Hunter and I said, "Hey, man, I screwed up yesterday." He goes, "Oh, did you?" And he kind of smiles, and I go, "What are you talking about?" He goes, No. Go ahead. Tell me your decision." I said, "Well, I screwed up on who I selected to go on this mission." He's like, "All right, tell me more." So I tell him, and he goes, "I'm glad you came in because I was about to come down to your team room and change your mind, and I was going to pick the right people for that mission." So my point of that is, I picked the wrong people because of power and position, and that's never going to be good. If you're using power or position to dominate people from your leadership position, it's not good. There's not one thing good about it. So an example would be Gettysburg. So when we were fighting at Gettysburg, do you think there's any power and position using to get those soldiers across the battlefield? Heck yeah, there was. They had to do it because they were untrained soldiers. But do you think that power and position works for a team sergeant on ODA threatening his people or saying, "I'm the team sergeant, you got to do this"? And there's some that do that. There are.
It's a technique.
Yeah, it's a technique, but it doesn't work. It's not going to make you successful, at the end of the day. So I learned at that point that, power and position, if I'm not the right guy for the job, I need to put the right person in that position if we want to be successful. And I think sometimes we forget that. We don't put the right people. We'll say, "No, that guy needs some time in this leadership position to get promoted." So you're going to skip the right person and you're going to put the douchebag in there.
I prefer the gender pronoun they.
They're them.
So Sean hit on a subject I'd like to kind of hit you guys with as well, and this is basically it's Army processes. So previously,
One officer point to Sean for using mosaic.
I thought this was about leadership processes.
well, not processes. Previously, across our ranks in the Army specifically, command positions at the battalion and brigade level, so the 05, 06 level, were selected based off of past performance and what was deemed as the potential based off that senior rater. And that was coming up through boards, through the promotion board, and then what was has become kind of known as the command select list board. But now, recently, over the past 2 years, and this has come across from the officer side and now to the non-commissioned officer side, in the CAPS, so the BCAP Battalion Commander Assessment Program, CCAP, and now the Sergeant Major's Assessment Program. And what it does is it takes a look at 1, potential, 2, performance, but it gets input 360 or holistically from not only superior officers that person has worked for, but also from peers and subordinates. And Sean, as you kind of hit on that with the command psychologist perspective of, individuals were able to give you their honest feedback anonymously about your leadership, or the holes in your swing, as you kind of put it. But these assessment programs are now being implemented. What do you think of that? Does that weed out toxic leadership? Is that weeding out and making sure we have the right person who's ready, prepared, and has that potential to serve successfully at a battalion or brigade level? Is that the right process we're looking through? And I'd love to get y'all's opinion on the CAPs and how we're implementing those.
So when I first heard that, I thought it was a bunch of crap. That's my first gut reaction, because I'm thinking, no, so this is going to allow somebody at the top to dictate exactly who they want because of their politics or because of something that has nothing to do with being a soldier in the military or to be a leader in the military. That's what I thought. Since then, I've talked to some of those guys that have went through that process. And I would like to say that I was 100% wrong. That's my opinion. And you guys you guys probably have a better insight to that. But when I heard some of the names of the people that got shut down from being promoted,
You saying it got it right?
they got it right.
So here, quick comment.
Well, that's now, and the other, from what I saw, they got it right.
So first of
But
all,
I'm only looking at like
Kyle
three
is showing
different
a sign of intelligence and that he's willing to change his mind. Because that's an attribute that in a lot of military leaders you don't see.
Take
quite
off
often,
one
you
of
know
his
what I mean?
officer points. He just got a point, an NCO point there.
Yeah. I think a couple.
He said "yeah," so take that one away.
a
Now,
couple
he lost
questions
it.
we have to ask is, why did we think the process needed to be changed? One, because that implies to me that there was a problem with it, right? And so I think I like to look at it through the incentives. You know what I mean? Like, what if we're going to want to talk, or NCOs? You know what I mean? Like, what is incentivized? What behaviors are incentivized, right, to get you the evaluation from whoever that you need to get, right, to get promoted?
Have you guys sat on the promotion boards yet? Have you done that?
I have
Colonel
not,
Farris.
but I sat on a BCAT board back in the fall. And long story short, I thought it was very good.
But even with the BCAP, you still have to show up at one point and do something physical.
Well, you know what? Here's what's interesting. And I'm going to get the stats wrong because I forgot about it. I want to say now, like, you have to opt in. You have to say, yes, I want to compete for battalion command, let's say. And I want to say 44% of the people opted out. Like, they didn't even attempt to compete, right? Which is close to half. And then so first of all, you got to ask the question, why? And part of it, there's a percentage of the people I think don't like to be tested anymore, right? Because part of it is you've got to show up, you've got to take a PT test, you've got to talk to the psychs, you've got to do all these just kind of
interactive.
Yeah, you know what I mean? I think some people get to the point where, like, they don't want to be tested anymore. They feel like, hey, I've arrived. Why do I need to pass these tests anymore, right? So there's an element of that. But here's what I found was, and it goes back to the peer evals and the
So
subordinate
you went
feedback.
through it, or you were on the board?
I was on the board. So by the time I've went to 06 Command, I missed it. You know what I mean? It wasn't a process yet.
Yeah. So you slipped through.
So I slipped through. Precisely. Exactly. So remember, there's a lot of luck involved in things. I was lucky. You know
Luck
what I mean?
and timing.
Timing is everything sometimes. But I'll say, when Sean talks about peer evals, the one thing about this too, it ain't like you can phone a friend and pick who fills these things out. It's randomized. And I think it goes back about 5 years.
And that's what this guy told me, and that made me interested.
Because I'll just say this. Here's what I think. The previous system, what did it incentivize? People who were really good, oftentimes, at communicating and looking good up and out to their bosses.
Or just on paper.
Or just on paper. You know what I mean? Or briefing well, sending really smart sit reps, really good emails, all those types of things. You know what I mean? Oh, this guy's squared away, It was a lot of it, in my opinion, perception-based.
All about perception.
Perception-based, And I think even studies have shown, numerous ones, that, hey, who really has the best perspective of the person? Oftentimes it's peers. And we know that, I think, because we've seen coming over time. We're subordinates, right? Like, who the real person is, what their real qualities, what their real leadership attributes are on these things, right? And that's why in the past we'd scratch our heads and be like, what? How'd this guy make it? Well, of course, that's why, because he looks really good, he briefs really well, all this stuff. But down and in, it was a dumpster fire within whatever unit that person was leading. But that was kind of masked from his boss or his boss's boss, And to me, it's shame on them, because that tells me they really didn't know their people, right? They never really knew who that person was. Either that, or they knew what was going on, but they chose not to address it because that person was getting good results for them. So that's my theory. what I saw in CCAP or BCAP, I should say, was it was very informative. It painted a pretty clear picture in certain individuals where you saw both in their peer feedback and their subordinate feedback, the fires were intersecting. It like, ooh, there's an issue here with this person in their leadership style, and it was, they call it counterproductive leadership now, but it was toxic. It was all about the person. It was about, hey, it's my career. That's what comes first, and I will do whatever it takes to get ahead, either of my peers, or I'll do whatever it takes on my subordinates. That way I get, that way I look good to my superiors. And that picture got painted pretty clearly. And I'll say this though as well, that I thought it was a very, very fair process in the way it got handled amongst the board members. I mean, you literally had to have almost like a unanimous consensus in order for that person then not to get selected, right? So it wasn't like some type of kangaroo court or something. I mean, it was very, very thoroughly done. And just because one or two people may have said, hey, look, I don't think this person's ready, you basically had to have a unanimous agreement amongst the board members to pull that person off the list. So I thought it was very good.
When I sat on the E7 promotion board up in Indianapolis, I thought that was going to be the most miserable time of my life, and it probably was. But yeah. I learned a ton, and that's exactly what I came away from there. Once the board, and by the board, I'm talking like the Special Forces. Let's see, we had SF 18s or 18s, 11s, and Civil Affairs or Science.
Yeah,
one of those two
37s and 38s.
Yeah, something was in there with it.
Yep.
But by the time we established our standards, there's no way you can cheat the system. There's no way. And I remember one guy specifically that was a ranger that this guy is like a superhero. He'd done it all. He'd done this in combat and everything looked great. And you could read his NCR and you knew that it wasn't a bunch of lies. These bullets actually were true bullets. And then, he's got a alcohol related incident. So I read it, and one thing was it was over 2 years old, but he had done the atomic elbow drop on a hippie's car up in a hippie's Prius or something up in Fort Lewis, and he blew all the windows out of it because this guy had an upside down American flag on the back of the car. Well, I brought it to everybody's attention because he didn't get promoted because he had this alcohol related incident. I picked up the dates and said he's outside of 2 years. We promoted the guy. Well, right there, that's like 1 of 10 of the whole time I was there that we had to discuss, because everything else was so cut and dried by the numbering. If you're not within, I don't know if you guys know how that works up there, but if you're not within like a point or a point and a half, it gets revoted because somebody's doing something sketchy. Right. It was a very, very good system. Yeah. And then the other thing that came out of it was at the end, there was a certain group that wanted to know why the numbers, why more blacks didn't get promoted in this category. And then when you looked at the numbers were exactly with how many
percentage-wise.
Yeah, percentage. Yeah. We came out perfect, and we didn't try to do that.
It's representative of the population.
It was representative of that. Yeah. The only group that was consistently high across the military were people that were Hispanic. And that's not a surprise to me, because every Hispanic dude that I ever worked with was like the squared away guy.
Absolutely.
So anyway, it was very interesting to me to see how that all shook out.
Getting back to the inception of these assessment programs for these leadership levels at the battalion and brigade, I think the genesis though is that we had a failure, I think, to identify the right people. We've had so many people that have failed at that level that we had to look at our process of selecting those people. And up to this point, the process was entirely on paper, right? And so what we as an organization, as an enterprise, we kind of decided that we couldn't trust the paper anymore, right? Why? Why couldn't we trust the paper, right? I think it goes back to that feedback, right? And were we giving the appropriate feedback, or were we incentivizing, right, the wrong type of person, the person that looked really great up and out, the person that got results, but on the backs of your people.
Oh, it is. Yes, it's Army-wide.
Yep.
They're the ones that actually implemented it. I mean, we're doing the team sergeant selection thing, but they were like, nope, this is the command thing.
Yeah, they started off for lieutenant colonels for battalion command, then they grew it to 06 command, and now they've got it for sergeants majors, CSMs as well.
Yep.
On the NCO side.
Plus, they got a whole thing where you got to evaluate the grass Yellow people.
Good.
How many reflective belts are being worn at the same time?
You still got more, Sean?
I do.
Yeah, keep going.
But now that you got me sidetracked because we're going to talk about haircuts and sideburns, I can't wait. But
What Sean really cares about.
I really do. Take a look. Those of you in podcast land can't see it, but luscious do.
I already got a picture.
Good deal.
You're
Hey,
looking luscious, bro.
He is wearing the
Nice.
SWCS Veritas e Libertas shirt for the record.
Well, he's counting the hair with the retention shirt, right?
That's right.
it's known as the team guy
We
mullet.
digress.
Anyway, so in a civilian world, like in a civilian capacity, let's say translate a battalion or brigade commander into a business world and look at like a similar position of scope and scale, someone in charge of 500 to 2,500 people in an organization. Would you ever hire that person without an interview? It's absolutely insane. It boggles my mind that we've been literally appointing people to positions, right? Those positions, not necessarily the right leaders, but appointing people by position because of time and grade, time and service, and a couple marks on paper without ever having an interview. So personally, I just tell you that I'm a fan of any process, right, that aims to correct a perceived failure. Goes back to the whole AAR comment, right? Like we did an AAR on promotions and say, hey, I think we can do better, right? We screwed a couple things up. We need to get this better. So right now we're trying something, right? We're experimenting. We're trying something. Is it going to be right the first time, the second time, the third time? Maybe not. But I have faith that we can iterate because we're a learning organization, and every time we'll learn something new, right? And every time we'll learn something better, and we'll apply it, and we'll continue to refine this. But I'll tell you that the jury's out, right? How will we know if this is going to work? Time will tell,
Sure.
right? Because the first people that have gone through this and got put in a position, they haven't had a complete tenure yet. Like we haven't had the first battalion and brigade commanders that we can finally evaluate and say, did it work, right? So time will tell. Like just have faith.
Is there I'm not qualified to talk about this at all, but I have a question. Is there a override process? Is there a commander's override?
No.
I don't agree with this position that the board has taken. I want my guy in position.
No. There's not.
Okay, that's something.
So
Yeah, that is-
the board
that's
composition,
significant.
real quick, just so you know, at least, we had in my group, whatever you want to call it, there was 2 general officers, and I think there were 4 06s,
Thanks.
and then we had a sergeant major, a CSM, a sitting CSM at the 06 level, who was kind of like the honest broker for everything. But there's no override that I'm aware of. And in fact, there's been a few instances already. I know guys who got taken off the list, and there was some heartburn at some pretty high levels. Like, what? How can this be? It's like, hey, it is. Yeah, it was a couple. But also, let me say this too, though. What I found interesting, again, one experience, but for all of its flaws in the previous system, it was interesting to see that, I would tell you what, 90% of the people that we interviewed and went through that process, it was like spot on. Like these people were it was the right people without question. It was by exception. And I want to say maybe of the 55 to 60 people we did over the course of about 8 days, I want to say there was 5 or 6. It was a little less than 10% that we had to take a really, really hard look at, and that showed some of these kind of character flaws and whatnot.
All right, gentlemen. So, last topic of the evening. Let's talk about, we've got active duty, we've got successful gentlemen that retired here. How do you stay relevant in life, whether you're in a leadership position or when you get out? How do you continue to be somebody that's being a positive influence on systems and people around you at all times? Not because you're entitled to something, but because we're continuing to earn it somehow. And let's go ahead and kick this off to you first, Kyle.
So I think one thing that you have to realize is that when you get out of the military, you're not in the military anymore. You just gotta let that go. And I'm not saying that to be mean, but if you walk around carrying your 201 file with you all the time, people are going to shut you down because none of that matters. What matters is what you're doing today and what you're going to do tomorrow. What you did in the past, it's over. So I wish more folks especially in our world, would stop doing that. Because I've heard some guys, they do an interview and it's, on Special Forces, Ranger, Sniper. I mean, they got it all down into like a 5-second clip. And it's like, man,
It's an elevator pitch.
yeah, it's an elevator pitch, and
They've
it
been
makes you
taught
want
that.
to throw them out of, slam their head against the wall. One of the things that I see, and that when I first got out of the unit, I struggled that first year. And it wasn't so much missing the people; it was missing the mission. And I think to me, that's how you stay relevant is by having a mission. So what is your mission when you get out of the military? You have to choose what that is. So if your mission is to be, we talked about this at lunch a little bit. Is your mission to run a 501c3 and get rich doing it? Well, there's some people doing that. If your mission is to run a 501c3 and take care of people, then that's another mission that you can have. If your mission is to run a tactical company like us, then okay, that's good. I work in my space that I'm comfortable with, which is shooting and close quarter battle type stuff. Writing was not really a strength, but I decided I'd try to write some books. That's worked out. But I see other guys that come out and just say, hey, I'm a former Special Forces guy, pay me a bunch of money. And I hate to break it to you guys, but that ain't happening. You have to perform on a daily basis. So I don't know if that answers the question, other than to stay relevant, you just have to be, what does that mean? Being relevant, I don't know what that means in some spaces. I know in my space, being relevant is I continue to train guys to the best of my ability. Are there guys that can outshoot me? Yep, I'm sure there are. Are there guys I can outshoot? Yep, there definitely are, so does that make me relevant? Nope, it has nothing to do with relevancy. One of the best things that I've had happen is when I have a student walk up to me on the range, and it's day 3 of a class, and they say, so what's your background? To me, that's an honor to have a guy say that, because they didn't come to a class because of my background. I haven't told them what my background
And
is.
you're not
'cause
offended by that.
I'm not offended by that at all.
Yep.
And then the next question is even better. How long you been working for VikingTactics?
Gold.
That's an even better question, because now VikingTactics is bigger than I am. So not that that's my legacy, because it's not. My legacy is going to be my grandkids, my kids, what they do. That's way more important than any of this crap anyway. But if you want to stay relevant, just pick an area where you think you can be relevant. It might be volunteering at your church to help their security. It might be you might be a guy that's good at woodworking. Do that if you're good. Look at some of these guys. You guys are familiar with Team Room Design?
No.
Benny Jenis.
Enlighten us, please.
Benny Jenis is a SF dude. He's still active, but he's an artist. There's a couple of dudes that do this, but I know him personally, and he's very, very good. He's an artist, and he makes the most awesome SF type art. So when guys are leaving, they get, like, he takes a M240 barrel and turns it into a you should have one of them up here. It's M240 barrel that's turned into a Viking axe. I mean, just the dude's amazing. Well, there you go. Find that niche, and be relevant in that part of your life. I just think that if you think relevancy is going to remain like you're some God's gift to the Special Forces world, I hate to break it to you, but every day there's somebody that's becoming better than you are. That being said, don't be afraid to use your experiences once you get out. If you were to write a book, your book would be a book worth reading. And I think that's what one of the things everybody sitting at this table can say. And those of you guys out there listening, if somebody wrote a book about your life right now and it wasn't worth reading, then maybe you ought to pick up your game a little bit. But I know your story. It's worth reading about. So that's something there. You can tell your story. And now I'm not saying to go out there and beat your chest like, oh, look at me. That's not it at all. Think of the number of people that you can help. People that are fighting adversity, will tell them what's happened to you. And I'm lucky. I pretty much was unscathed. But there's a lot of guys that can do great things. And I'm not talking about going to other SF guys or other soldiers. You can do that just for regular people. There's a guy that I know that he's a blacksmith, and he has what is it called? The high functioning autism. So he doesn't know he's autistic. He has no idea. He goes to the doctor with his daughter because they're wondering if she has some troubles. And the doctor says, the doctor was a lady and turns to his wife and says, well, you know, your daughter has, you know, high functioning autism, but you understand that already. And he looked at his wife. He's like, I didn't know you were autistic. And she looks at him like, you're an idiot. So he's a high functioning, this guy's brilliant. I mean, if you don't know what an autist, somebody that has autism can do, they can do things that we'll never, ever even begin to think about being able to do. So he goes and he was asked to go do some speeches to some kids about the business. And his business is called RMJ Forge. Ryan Johnson, he was speaking to this group of people and he said, and by the way, I have a superpower. Now this guy wears bib overhauls, but he's got a degree in like mechanical engineer. The guy's brilliant. And he says, I have a superpower. I'm high functioning autistic. And most of the kids are like, what's that, you know? And then everybody got to leave and two kids come up to him and said, they were both crying. Because he's the first person that told them, and they were both autistic, he's the first person that told them that they had a superpower. So think of what he just did. He changed two kids' lives. And since then, he's went on to do that with more people. So I guess my point is, if you get to the right people, all you can do is change one person's life, and you're successful. You know, everybody right now is all focusing on how many followers they got on social media. Jesus had 12.
On that topic of maintaining relevance when you transition out of the military, totally appreciate your perspective because it's what I was expecting. You know, I'm going to face. When it's my turn to leave, because newsflash, all of us have an expiration date, and it's guaranteed. We're all going to leave the military at some point. I think when you talked about that gentleman who shared his story about being autistic, it's kind of the thought I was having is that if you want to stay relevant, if you want to continue to contribute, if that's what you really want to do, if you want to keep contributing to this community, you have to share, right? You have to share that knowledge and experience. You have to let people know, their history, like the origin story and the how we got to this point. Things that a lot of people take for granted as we, cycle through positions and through units, is that we might not have as long of a standing or a long understanding of the history of how we got to this point. As much so as like the Compo 4, retirees who probably have been there and done that can tell you, hey, please don't try that one thing because we tried that in 1989 and it failed. Like, don't do that again. If you're going to do it, remember these 3 lessons that we forgot to capture in our lessons learned that got hung on the portal, right? So
Still hanging there.
Exactly.
Untouched.
So I think if you want to maintain that kind of relevance, you got to understand that it's kind of a one-sided relevance. You're not staying relevant in what's currently developing, and you're not staying relevant in how the future is unfolding. You're giving people a window into the past, right? So that they can be more successful and learn from your mistakes, right?
History, right?
Exactly. And so you're acting as that living history book, right? And the thing is that that's also something I think that you can't force on people. It's something they have to willingly want to take in. Like they've got to be seekers of that knowledge in order to really assimilate it, I think, and to bring that back to their organization, right? So I'd say that for me personally, the best mentors I've ever had were not people that were forcing their mentorship on me. They were people that I was actively seeking, to be mentored by, right? And so if you want to be a mentor, right, but no one's calling you, like maybe you're not the right person to be a mentor, right? So there's a few people that have already told me, hey, when I get out, like they're still going to give me calls, but if they stop calling, I'll take that as my cue, right? That, hey, maybe, I've lost that relevance, right? But I think it's one-sided, is that you're really giving people a window into the past, which is all good because it's going to help them in the future.
So what I'm kind of hearing is whether you're in the military or out of the military, and in the context of leadership or even not, it's about, I think, what I'm hearing is it's about serving others and giving back. And then finding ways to positively impact people's lives, again, in a positive way. It could be just one person. If it's just one person, just think about that. I mean, that's in that person's life, you've made a difference somehow. It could be 10,000 people. But just trying to find ways to positively impact people's lives, and using your position, if you're in the military, whatever that position is, or your platform, if you're outside the military, again, as a force for good, right? Using that as a force for good to serve others and do what's right.
We had a guy over one night, and he said, well, you got to take care of yourself, and then you can start to get everything else squared away. And I didn't pick up on as much as my better half did, but saying, no, it's not about you and you being number one. It's about service to others. Because if you serve others, it will make everything for you better.
Totally.
If you can't have that attitude, like, well, I got to take care of myself first. No, you don't. You got to take care of others, and then everything else will fall into place. And the hardest part of that to swallow was later in the day, actually it was the next day, I was coming back from an event, and my bride said, we were talking to that cat, and he said that. What did you think about that? I said, yeah, it's kind of jacked up. And she goes, does that remind you of anybody? So that's the other side of it. You need to have a good partner in crime that will call you out when you're jacked up, because if you don't have that, I feel bad for you, because it's a huge advantage. You want to talk about a force multiplier. If you and your spouse are on the same sheet of music, and I'm not just saying that because my wife is sitting on the other side of the room getting ready to whip me into shape if I don't say it. But the bottom line is it made me aware that I needed to work on some stuff too. And once again, that AR, that Tim talked about, if you can't take that from your family, then you're thin-skinned as well. So you better be able to take that from not just the military, but from your family, and make those, accept those changes and then make those changes. And it's not easy. Every day is a struggle. At least for me it is. So
I think when you start searching and trying to figure out your place in the sun, right? Your relevance, you got to ask yourself, relevant to what? We had this conversation at lunch. I almost feel like I should recuse myself from even commenting on this, because I didn't jump right into something. I did an awful lot of navel gazing, right? To try and figure that out. What am I passionate about? What should I do? The world's your oyster.
This is after retirement.
After retirement. And thankfully I had friends to help keep me moving. But as time went on and I got more and more frustrated and a little bit more agitated, my partner in life is, nudges start becoming kidney punches, right? I realized, just number one, go back to the beginning. Remember why you started all of this and why you joined the club that you joined, right? And it's usually because we wanted to help people. So remember that. Put that in your back pocket. And then do what you were trained to do, what you learned to do, maybe what was a part of you from the origin. And that's adapt. Mm-hmm. So I can tell you from, my own personal history of trying to put every round through the same hole, wanting to be perfect and never really pushing yourself and failing, right? Everything we talked about up to this point still applies, whether it's leading other people or leading yourself. And just keep moving and adapt. I'm moving again. Do I know that this is like the be all end all? I don't. But now that I've got some momentum, I can start to see other things and the apertures opening up. And then I think the last thing I would say is, remember, in life, you accomplish nothing by yourself. And so when you leave the military, remember that, right? Stay connected. Do things for other people. Lose yourself in other people. And that helps you get excited about just about everything.
I don't want to end this with the fact that you guys promised that this would be Tim coming out with a podcast, and like, this guy's a natural.
It's official.
Yeah. Like wow. Like, right? Like, yeah. I don't know. I'm kind of speechless. Anyway, Bobby.
You should see him do interpretive dance. It's
Yeah. We'll see the back tattoo on the next one. We'll have to bring in video.
Yes, he's got lamb.
Don't get him fired up.
He's got lamb down there?
No.
It says jumpers hit it.
The jumpers.
Oh, gentlemen, I've been blown away. This has been a huge honor to host y'all here on Pineland Underground, here in the Falcon Snail Pub. Again, this is the largest crew we've had. Pretty dynamic discussions from some very accomplished RSOF leaders. Absolute privilege to have you on the show today. Really excited to hear, take these lessons, take these, these input, and yeah, just impart these across our audience, across the Special Warfare Center, and the other members of our regiment and our listeners on Pineland Underground. Across the military and the civilian sector. Chuck, any final words before we sign off?
Yeah, I'll give you 3 more officer points for that outro. It was very officer. Thank you for that, Bobby.
All right, Bobby and Chuck signing off. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for tuning in to Pineland Underground. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join us next time as we explore more critical topics from the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School, the Special Operations Center of Excellence. I'm your host, Major Bobby Tuttle, and we'll see you next time in Pineland Underground.